Morrow's breath caught in his chest, the tension in the air so thick he could almost taste it. The Deathworlders hadn't dismissed them. In fact, they had taken notice. But that was just the first test. There were more to come, and the stakes were higher than ever before. As Shirakul's image faded from the screen, the room fell silent. The human fleet commanders exchanged glances. It wasn't over yet. Humanity had taken its first step. But the real battle had just begun. And as Morrow stood in the quiet room, staring out at the fleet of ships on the horizon, he couldn't help but wonder what the Deathworlders would demand next. Would humanity be able to prove itself worthy once again? Or would this small, fragile hope come crashing down under the weight of the galaxy's might? Only time would tell. The tension in the command room was palpable. As the Deathworlder fleet loomed overhead, their ships blocking out the stars, Elias Morrow stood still, staring at the massive holographic projection in front of him. His mind raced, replaying the conversation with Shirakul, the Deathworlder leader. The first test had been passed, but Morrow knew better than anyone that this was far from over. It was just the beginning, and he had no illusion about what would happen if humanity failed. Shirakul had been clear. Humanity had shown potential with their display of agility, their ability to adapt. But that was only one small part of what the Deathworlders wanted to see. What the universe's most powerful predators wanted was proof of strength, something that couldn't be faked. And now, humanity had to demonstrate something far more challenging. They had to show that they could endure in the face of overwhelming adversity. The clock was ticking. The Deathworlders had set a deadline, a final moment to prove humanity's worth. And that moment was approaching faster than Morrow could ever have imagined. The human fleet was preparing for their next maneuver, one that would take them even closer to the brink of destruction. If they failed, there would be no chance for survival. But if they succeeded, if humanity could rise to the occasion, they might just earn the respect of the Deathworlders. They might prove that they weren't just a fleeting species, something to be wiped out with a single strike. Morrow took a deep breath. He looked around at the faces of the fleet commanders, the men and women who would risk everything for humanity's survival. They were nervous, but their resolve was clear. Each one of them had given their all to this mission, and they knew what was at stake. They had seen the Deathworlder ships above them, felt the fear in their bones, but they weren't backing down. They couldn't. Not now. "We've come this far," Morrow said, his voice steady, despite the chaos brewing inside him. "But this next move is everything. We're not just showing our strength with weapons, we're showing it with our will to survive. If we don't make it through this, humanity's future ends today." A quiet murmur passed through the room. The fleet commanders nodded in agreement. They had been through countless simulations, countless exercises, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle. It was a test of who humanity truly was. The fleet's plan was simple. They would launch an unexpected attack on the Deathworlder forces, not with brute force, but with a strategy designed to showcase humanity's ingenuity and resilience. The Deathworlders had already shown their power, and they had given humanity one chance to prove itself. But Morrow understood one thing above all. This test wasn't just about military strength. It was about showing that humanity could be as fierce as the Deathworlders, but in a different way. The fleet prepared for the operation, moving with precision as the Deathworlder ships remained in formation above them. Their overwhelming size and power had been a constant reminder of how outmatched humanity was, but that didn't matter now. They had no choice but to fight, to show that they had the resilience to endure. Morrow stood by the communications panel, his hands clenched into fists. He couldn't afford to think of what might happen if they failed. Failure meant extinction, and he couldn't let that happen. He had to focus on what was in front of him, the plan, the mission, and the hope that humanity could rise to the challenge. "Sir," one of the commanders called out, snapping Morrow from his thoughts. "The Deathworlder fleet is signaling. They're preparing to engage." Dr. Emma hesitated, her thoughts spinning. The aliens had been asking for help, and this was where the signal originated. But entering this strange and crumbling station could be dangerous. Whatever it was clear that it had been left alone for a reason. "We don't have a choice," Dr. Emma replied, her voice hardening with resolve. "We need to find out what happened here, and we need to do it now. Prepare the team for landing." The spacecraft's engines adjusted as they slowly descended toward the massive structure, carefully avoiding the debris that floated around it. The station loomed larger as they got closer, its jagged, metallic surface reflecting the eerie light of distant stars. There was no sign of any life, no signs of movement inside the structure. Everything appeared to be still, too still. The tension in the air was thick as the ship touched down on the station's surface. The metallic ground beneath them was rough, pocked with deep craters and scorch marks. The landing gear groaned as it settled into place, and for a moment, all Dr. Emma could hear was her own breath. "Prepare to disembark," Dr. Emma ordered. The team, clad in spacesuits and ready for whatever they might find, gathered their equipment and moved to the airlock. As the airlock door opened with a hiss, Dr. Emma stepped out onto the surface of the station, her boots making a quiet thud as they hit the metal ground. The rest of the team followed closely behind. The gravity was lower than Earth's, but enough to keep them grounded. Their helmets filtered the air, but it still felt strange to be in a place so completely abandoned. "Stay alert," Dr. Emma instructed, her voice crackling over the comms. "We don't know what we're walking into." The surface of the station was eerily quiet. The walls were covered with strange, glowing symbols, and the air was thick with dust. It felt as though the station had been frozen in time, abandoned long ago. There were signs of damage, but nothing that suggested recent activity. It was as if the entire structure had been forgotten. They moved cautiously through the corridors, each step echoing in the emptiness. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to thrum with energy, the faint glow from the walls growing stronger. It wasn't just abandoned. It was a place on the brink of something, a place that was still alive in some way. Finally, they'd reached the heart of the station. The chamber they entered was enormous, a vast circular room with a massive console in the center. The console hummed with energy, and strange devices blinked with unreadable symbols. It was clear that whoever had built this station had a technology far beyond humanity's capabilities. "This is it," Dr. Emma whispered. "This is where the signal originated." She moved closer to the console, her fingers hovering over the controls. There was something here, something that might explain everything. The alien messages, their desperate plea for help, the strange energy surges. But as she began to examine the console, a voice crackled through their comms, breaking the silence. "It's too late." The voice was distorted, weak, and unmistakably alien. It was coming from the speakers of the console. Dr. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What's happening?" Thompson asked, his voice tight. A series of harsh, static bursts filled the room, followed by another chilling sentence. "They're here." Then, the entire station seemed to tremble. The lights flickered, and the low hum of the console became a roar. Something had triggered, and it wasn't friendly. Dr. Emma's mind raced. Whatever had been hunting the aliens was now coming for them. "Get to the ship," Dr. Emma shouted. "Now." The team turned and sprinted toward the exit, but as they did, the walls around them began to shake violently. The distant sound of something massive moving echoed through the corridors, growing louder with each passing second. The hunt was on. The walls of the station rumbled beneath their feet, as though the entire structure was awakening from a long slumber. Dr. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she led the team through the dark, unstable corridors. The ominous sound grew louder, and the air seemed to thicken, charged with a strange energy. Whatever was coming for them, it was close, too close. "Move faster," Dr. Emma barked, her voice crackling through the comms as she urged the team forward. Their footsteps echoed through the narrow hallways, their helmets casting eerie reflections on the walls as they sprinted toward the ship. The station's tremors grew stronger, and debris began to fall from the ceiling, creating a dangerous obstacle course. Humanity had always chosen the path of peace, even when the Galactic Council imposed unfair trade laws, seized human colonies under the guise of protection, and treated Earth as nothing more than a second-class civilization. Humanity remained patient. They believed in diplomacy, in negotiations, in finding common ground. But patience has limits, and on one fateful day, the galaxy crossed a line that could never be undone. It started with a humanitarian convoy, ships filled with supplies, medicine, and volunteers sent to aid a war-torn sector. Earth had no interest in the war itself, but they refused to let innocent lives suffer. The convoy flew under the banner of neutrality, marked by beacons recognized across the stars. No weapons, no military escort, just doctors, engineers, and humanitarians trying to do what they had always done: help. Then came the attack. Without warning, a Galactic Council fleet surrounded the convoy. No demands, no negotiations, just a brutal, calculated assault. The peaceful ships, unarmed and defenseless, were torn apart by plasma fire. Thousands of souls, men, women, children, were wiped out in minutes. The few distress signals that managed to escape were ignored. The Council later claimed it was a tragic mistake, a miscommunication in orders. But everyone knew the truth. It was a message, a warning to humanity that their goodwill meant nothing, that they were nothing. When the news reached Earth, there was silence. No immediate retaliation, no fiery threats, just a quiet, simmering rage that spread like wildfire. Across the planet, leaders gathered behind closed doors. The old voices, the ones who had always urged diplomacy, spoke of restraint, of finding a peaceful resolution. But for the first time in history, they were drowned out. The President of Earth stood before the United Nations Assembly, addressing not just world leaders, but the entire human race. The transmission was sent across every colony, every outpost, every ship flying under the banner of Earth. The President's voice was calm, steady, but there was no mistaking the finality in their words. For too long, we have held to the belief that peace is the only path forward. We have endured insult, oppression, and injustice, all in the hope that reason would prevail. But the Galactic Council does not understand reason. They do not respect peace. They see it as weakness. The broadcast shifted, showing the wreckage of the convoy, the burned remains of ships once filled with hopeful souls, the smoldering bodies of children who had never even held a weapon. The air grew heavy. Across Earth and its colonies, people watched in horror, in anger. This was not an act of war. This was murder, and we will not let it stand. The words rang out like a thunderclap. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. The decision had already been made. Humanity would no longer beg for fairness. They would no longer plead for respect. The Galactic Council wanted to see what happened when Earth abandoned peace. They were about to find out. The Galactic Council had made a mistake, a terrible, irreversible mistake. They had believed humanity would remain as it always had, diplomatic, patient, unwilling to fight. They had assumed that Earth's words were empty threats, just noise from an insignificant species. But as the days passed, something unsettling began to happen. Silence. Humanity, once known for its constant diplomatic efforts, had gone completely quiet. No protests, no official complaints, no attempts to negotiate. The embassies on Earth were closed overnight, and all Galactic Council representatives were expelled. Trade routes leading to human colonies were cut off. Allied species that had once relied on human goods and services found themselves locked out without explanation. Even communications were ignored. It was as if Earth had vanished from the galactic stage. But the silence was not submission. It was preparation. Within secret military installations buried beneath mountains and hidden deep in space, Earth's greatest minds worked without rest. War had never been humanity's first choice, but they had never been unprepared for it. The moment the decision was made, Classified projects long thought unnecessary were brought back to life. Shipyards that had been used for peaceful exploration were now building warships at an unprecedented speed. Factories converted overnight to produce weapons and armor. Research facilities pushed their technology beyond known limits, and across Earth and its colonies, people were enlisting in numbers never seen before. The Galactic Council remained oblivious. In their arrogance, they assumed humanity was too weak, too fractured to respond. They had crushed countless civilizations before, forcing them into compliance. To them, Earth was no different. But among the Council's ranks, there were whispers, quiet warnings from those who had spent time among humans, who had studied their history. They spoke of a species that had endured countless wars, that had risen from the ashes of its own destruction time and time again. They spoke of a people who could be kind, generous, and peaceful, until the moment they were pushed too far. Still, the Council ignored the warnings. They believed humanity would do nothing. They believed Earth was afraid. Then, the first ship disappeared. It was a Galactic Council patrol vessel, monitoring the borders near human space. One moment, it was transmitting its routine status report. The next, it was gone. No distress signal, no wreckage, just silence. Then another ship vanished, and another. Panic spread among the Council fleets. They doubled patrols, deployed more warships. But it didn't matter. The disappearances continued. Their forces were being picked apart one by one, and they had no idea how. It was as if an invisible hand was reaching out from the void, tearing them away. Fear settled in. For the first time in history, the Galactic Council was faced with an enemy they did not understand, an enemy they could not see. And then, finally, humanity broke its silence. A single transmission was sent to the Galactic Council's High Command. A voice, calm and resolute, spoke 3 words: "We are coming." The Galactic Council's High Command had never known fear. They had ruled the stars for centuries, crushing rebellions before they could begin, enforcing their laws with an iron grip. But now fear gripped them like a vice. Humanity had been silent for weeks, and in that silence, their fleets were disappearing one by one. No wreckage, no survivors, just void where once mighty warships had patrolled. It was an enemy they could not see, and for the first time, they felt powerless. Then came the first strike. It happened at the outermost defense post of the Galactic Council, a massive station orbiting a barren world. It was home to tens of thousands of soldiers, advanced weapon systems, and entire squadrons of warships. It was a fortress meant to be impenetrable. But on that day, it became humanity's first battlefield. Without warning, the station's long-range sensors failed. Communications went silent. Officers scrambled to diagnose the problem, believing it to be a malfunction. But then the alarms blared. Unidentified ships had breached the perimeter. Before anyone could react, the first explosion rocked the station. Then another, and another. Security feeds flickered with nightmarish images. Massive human warships, unlike anything recorded in the Council's archives, moved with terrifying precision. They were sleek, dark, and armed with weapons that defied conventional understanding. Beams of energy cut through Council warships as if they were made of paper. Missiles tore through shields that should have been impenetrable. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Panic set in. The Council officers aboard the station screamed for reinforcements, but no help came. Their distress calls were met with silence, just as humanity's cries for justice had been ignored before. The station's defense systems activated, targeting the invading fleet, but it was useless. Humanity had prepared for this moment. Every weapon, every countermeasure, every battle tactic the Council had ever used was now obsolete. Then, the final blow came. A single human warship, larger than anything seen before, fired a beam of energy directly into the station's core. In an instant, the structure that had stood for centuries crumbled. Fire and debris filled the void as thousands of Council soldiers perished in a flash of light. a symbol of galactic authority, reduced to dust. The attack lasted less than an hour. When it was over, there was nothing left but silence, a silence that spread across the galaxy like a plague. The Council scrambled for answers. How had humanity advanced so quickly? How had they built weapons far beyond anything in known space? The answer was simple. Humanity had never been weak. They had only been holding back. The Galactic Council had always assumed peace was humanity's only path. They had believed that without diplomacy, Earth had nothing. But they had forgotten one truth. Humanity had never needed peace to survive. When war came, they did not cower. They adapted. They evolved. And now, they had become something the Council had never imagined. A force of vengeance. The message was clear. The war had begun. And this time, it was humanity who would decide how it ended. The Galactic Council had never faced an enemy like this. Their fleets, once seen as invincible, were being ripped apart. Their stations, symbols of power, had fallen like brittle glass. Humanity wasn't just attacking. They were dismantling the very foundations of the Council's rule. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Fear took hold in every system. Planets that had once followed the Council without question now hesitated. They had witnessed the destruction of entire armadas. They had heard the terrified transmissions before they were cut short. And worst of all, they had seen how humanity fought. Not with overwhelming numbers, but with precision. Every strike was deliberate. Every battle was won before it even began. The Council tried to retaliate. Their war fleets launched counteroffensives, sending entire battle groups to intercept the human forces. But each time, the result was the same. They were met with silence. Their fleets would enter human-claimed space, only for their signals to vanish hours later. Not a single ship returned. Then came the most terrifying moment of all, the fall of Tarvaxis Prime. Tarvaxis was the beating heart of the Council's military operations, a fortress world thought to be untouchable. It was home to the largest shipyards, training academies, and defensive fleets in the known galaxy. The idea that any force, no matter how advanced, could threaten Tarvaxis was unthinkable. But then, without warning, the skies above the planet darkened. Humanity had arrived. At first, the Council forces didn't understand what they were seeing. Their sensors struggled to detect the approaching fleet. Human ships were surrounded by strange energy fields that disrupted targeting systems. Their movements were unpredictable, faster than any warship had a right to be. But the true horror began when the attack started. The first wave came in complete silence. Human ships moved like shadows, slipping past defense lines unnoticed. Then, in the span of seconds, the Council's most powerful defense stations erupted in flames. It was as if the very air had ignited. Explosions rippled across the surface of the world, turning entire cities into smoldering wastelands. Elite legions, trained for planetary defense, never even saw their attackers. Human strike teams moved like ghosts, disabling critical infrastructure before vanishing into the night. Tarvaxis Prime fell in a single day. The Council had no words, no response. Their mightiest world had been taken without negotiation, without hesitation. And then, once again, humanity sent a message, broadcasted to every major world in the galaxy. You called us weak. You thought we would break. You were wrong. Now you will learn what it means to fear. It was not a declaration of war. War had already begun. It was a warning. And for the first time in history, the Galactic Council truly understood what they had done. They had awakened something they could not control. And now, there was no stopping it. The Galactic Council was breaking. Fear seeped into its highest ranks, spreading like an infection. The destruction of Tarvaxis Prime had been more than a military defeat. It had shattered the illusion of their invincibility. The Council had ruled through fear, crushing those who resisted, believing their power was absolute. But now, they were the ones afraid. Every day brought new reports of vanished fleets, destroyed outposts, and planets that had once been loyal to the Council, now refusing to answer their calls. Allies who had once bowed before them were hesitating, whispering of surrender, of switching sides before it was too late. The galaxy was beginning to see the truth. The Council was no longer the greatest power. That title now belonged to humanity. The Council's warlords demanded immediate retaliation. They gathered what remained of their fleets and launched a desperate counteroffensive, throwing entire armadas at the advancing human forces. It was their last gamble, a final attempt to stop the tide before it reached their core worlds. The largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history was sent to meet humanity head-on. Over 1,000 warships, commanded by the most experienced admirals, armed with the most devastating weapons the Council had ever created. This was their strongest defense, their last chance. If this force failed, there would be nothing left to stop Earth's advance. For days, they waited in deep space at the edge of the Council's home systems, their massive fleet stretching across the void like an iron wall. They scanned the darkness, searching for the enemy, but saw nothing. No approaching ships, no transmissions, just emptiness. Then, on the fourth day, their sensors flickered. It was barely a blip, a disturbance in the void. And then another, and another. The admirals dismissed it at first. They had been on edge, seeing threats where there were none. But then, their long-range scanners failed. Communications between their ships began to distort. Something was moving out there, something vast and unseen. Then, the first explosion erupted from the fleet. A Council battleship, one of their largest and most powerful, was there one moment and gone the next. Torn apart in a silent inferno. No warning, no detected weapon fire, just destruction. Then another ship exploded, and another. Panic surged through the fleet. The admirals barked orders, commanding their forces to spread out, to target whatever was attacking them. But they couldn't see their enemy. Their sensors remained blind, their weapons useless against an invisible force. Then the stars themselves seemed to shift. Human warships emerged from the void, slipping through hidden warp corridors that no one had known existed. They did not come in overwhelming numbers. They did not charge recklessly into battle. They moved like assassins, each ship striking with surgical precision before vanishing back into the darkness. The Council's fleet never stood a chance. The battle lasted 6 hours. By the end, only wreckage remained. The Council's grandest fleet, their last hope, had been erased from existence. The few survivors who managed to flee sent frantic distress signals, their voices filled with terror. We can't stop them. They see everything. They strike before we can react. This isn't a war. It's a slaughter. The transmission cut off. The Council's core systems were now exposed. Their defenses were gone. Their fleets were nothing more than drifting debris. And humanity was still coming. Across the Council's homeworld, fear gripped the population. The ruling elite, those who had once sneered at Earth's defiance, now scrambled for a way to escape. They had always believed themselves untouchable, secure in their power. But now, they saw the truth. There was no escape. Then, a final message arrived. It was a simple broadcast, sent across every Council channel. No threats, no demands, just a single chilling sentence. This war ends when you are gone. The Galactic Council had ruled with fear for centuries. Now, that same fear had come for them. You said, the Galactic Council's homeworld, Viridios Prime, had always been the shining jewel of their empire. It was a place of towering spires, sprawling palaces, and endless displays of wealth and power. The Council's leaders had spent centuries ensuring its defenses were impenetrable, shielded by planetary fortresses, orbital defense platforms, and entire fleets stationed in high orbit. Viridios Prime was meant to be untouchable. But now, all those defenses were gone. The great fleets that had once protected the system lay in ruins, reduced to nothing more than drifting wreckage. The orbital stations had been silenced, either destroyed outright or abandoned in a panic. The planet's leaders had fled deep underground, their once proud confidence shattered. And above them, in the darkness of space, humanity waited. The skies of Viridios Prime had remained eerily silent for days. The people below, once arrogant in their belief that their rulers could protect them, now huddled in fear, waiting for the inevitable. Then, without warning, the silence broke. Hundreds of fireballs streaked across the sky. They weren't human warships, nor were they weapons. They were the remains of the Council's last fleet, twisted wreckage, shattered hulls, the bodies of those who had once been the galaxy's most feared commanders. Their destruction had been so complete that their remains were now being used as a message. The meaning was clear. The end had come. Panic erupted across the capital. The elites of the Council rushed to escape, using every available means to flee into deep space. But it was already too late. From the blackness above, human ships descended. Unlike the Council's war fleets, which had always sought to dominate through sheer numbers and overwhelming force, humanity's approach was different. Their ships moved with precision, striking only where needed, their presence like the whisper of death. Then the first wave of attacks began. They did not strike civilians. There were no indiscriminate bombardments, no needless destruction. Humanity was not here for conquest. They were here for justice. One by one, the planetary fortresses were disabled, their great cannons falling silent. The underground bunkers, where the Council's highest leaders had cowered, were breached with effortless ease. The most powerful beings in the galaxy, the ones who had once dictated the fate of entire civilizations, were dragged from their hiding places, some screaming, some silent in shock. There were no trials, no speeches, no last-minute deals. For centuries, the Council had ruled through fear. Now that fear had turned against them, and humanity did not forgive. The executions were swift. The Council members, who had once commanded entire armadas with a single word, now met their end with no ceremony, no final declaration of power. The galaxy had watched as they had sent billions to die in wars of greed. Now, the galaxy watched as they fell, one by one. By nightfall, Viridios Prime was no longer the seat of the Galactic Council. The war was over, and yet there was no celebration. Humanity did not rejoice. There were no parades, no triumphant speeches. They had never wanted this war. It had been forced upon them. And now that it was finished, they did not revel in their victory. They had won, but at what cost? Earth had changed. The galaxy had changed. Peace was no longer an option, not in the way it had once been. As the last embers of battle faded and the Council's reign was finally brought to an end, humanity stood at the edge of something new, something unknown. And the stars, which had once looked down upon them with contempt, now watched in silence. You said, the war was over. The Galactic Council was no more. Their fleets had been annihilated, their homeworld taken, their leaders executed without ceremony. And yet, the galaxy did not celebrate. The destruction of the Council had not brought peace. It had brought something far more terrifying: uncertainty. For centuries, the Galactic Council had been the ultimate power. They had ruled with an iron grip, crushing rebellions, dictating laws, shaping the fate of entire civilizations. They were tyrants, yes, but they were also stability. Their empire had been cruel, but it had been an order that the galaxy understood. Now, that order was gone. The galaxy looked to humanity, waiting to see what would come next. Would they claim the Council's throne? Would they become conquerors, replacing one empire with another? Would they impose their will upon the stars? But humanity did none of these things. They did not declare themselves rulers. They did not seize territory. They did not demand tribute. Instead, they simply left. The human fleets withdrew from Viridios Prime, abandoning the palaces of the fallen Council. The planets that had once been under the Council's dominion were left to decide their own fate. Some banded together, forming fragile alliances in the vacuum of power. Others descended into chaos, their leaders scrambling to take advantage of the sudden shift. The galaxy had expected conquerors. Instead, they were given something they had never known: freedom. But with that freedom came fear. The species that had once served the Council now realized the terrible truth. Humanity had not abandoned peace. Peace had abandoned them. They had been a species that once sought diplomacy, cooperation, understanding. But that was before the Council had tried to break them. Before entire human colonies had been erased, their people slaughtered without mercy. Before humanity had learned what the galaxy truly was, a place where power ruled and weakness was crushed. Humanity had not sought war, but when war came, they had embraced it. And now, as the galaxy stood fractured and leaderless, they understood what it meant. Humanity had changed. They were not conquerors. They did not seek control. But they would never be weak again. In the weeks that followed the Council's fall, whispers spread across the stars. Some feared humanity, seeing them as a force beyond reason, an unstoppable force that had chosen violence over diplomacy. Others respected them, recognizing their strength, their willingness to do what no other species had dared. And then there were those who sought them out. A new order began to take shape, not an empire, not a council, but something else entirely. Species that had suffered under the Council's rule turned to humanity for guidance, for protection. Not as rulers, but as something more. Guardians. The old galactic order was gone. The balance of power had been shattered. But humanity remained, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as a warning. For those who would seek to dominate, to oppress, to rule through fear, the message was clear. Humanity had forsaken peace, and the galaxy would never be the same again.